He slammed the gavel before she could speak. The reverberation echoed through the polished courtroom, bouncing off the marble walls and landing like an accusation at Jasmine Crockett's feet. She stood at the defense table, shoulders squared, fighting the tremor in her breath. The judge had already given her a dismissive glare as though her mere presence were an inconvenience. She was 12 minutes late. That alone seemed to condemn her in his eyes. Her attorney looked at her with a faint hint of apology, as if he too feared that a single misstep today could end it all before it even began. Jasmine's fingers twitched against the table's edge, and she steadied herself with a silent reminder. Truth is on your side. Truth and the evidence you carry, wrapped in a protective binder that now lay at her feet, its edges scuffed from too many frantic nights of preparation. The onlookers in the gallery watched with a mixture of fascination and unease. This wasn't a typical case, not by a long shot. The air was heavy, as though everyone anticipated the next thunderclap of the gavel. Nobody dared to shift too loudly in their seats. The bailiff stood rigid by the wall, and a few members of the press clutched their notepads. Whatever was about to unfold, it had the makings of a controversy that would ripple far beyond these courtroom doors. Jasmine could feel the weight of the cameras in the hallway, the hush of the public in the corridors, all of them waiting for the faintest whiff of scandal. "Ms. Crockett," the judge's voice boomed. He didn't even look up from the file on his bench. He just sighed, a long exhalation that signaled a mixture of impatience and disdain. "We are here to address your alleged misrepresentations made under oath. Do you understand the gravity of these proceedings?" He finally lifted his gaze, meeting hers with cold, unyielding eyes. At his side, the court clerk and stenographer waited, hands poised over their machines, capturing every syllable. Jasmine nodded once, her lips pressed together. She tried not to show the flicker of doubt that nudged at her conscience. She could see the prosecutor shift in his seat, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. All around her, silent observers braced themselves. A handful of them were allies, people who believed in her. They had seen enough corruption to suspect that something was deeply wrong with how this court was handling her situation. But no one dared speak out of turn. The tension in the room was too thick, as though every word needed to be measured and weighed. Outside, the hallway was presumably buzzing with curiosity, but inside the courtroom, a hush pressed down like a moral clamp. Jasmine inhaled slowly, reminding herself that she had to keep her composure. One emotional outburst, and it would all be used against her. The origins of this ordeal were tangled, rooted in a bureaucratic fiasco that had spun out of control. Jasmine had testified in a prior hearing about misconduct she'd witnessed in a government office. She'd provided details, dates, names, behaviors. It was a routine testimony in a whistleblower investigation, or at least it was supposed to be. But soon after she gave her statement, contradictory paperwork surfaced with her signature, suggesting she'd lied. The state's attorney pounced on it, accusing her of perjury. Jasmine insisted the signature was forged or taken out of context. But the mountain of official documents, all pointing to her supposed dishonesty, cast a long shadow. Now the judge seemed determined to prove that she had indeed lied under oath, and if found guilty, her entire life could be upended. Her attorney, a lean man named Harold Bryant, cleared his throat and rose to address the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his tone respectful yet firm, "my client maintains her innocence and is prepared to present conclusive evidence to that effect." He glanced at Jasmine, encouraging her to remain steady. The judge flicked his gaze downward, studying a page in the thick file before him. His lips curved into a faint sneer. It was subtle, but Jasmine caught it. In that slight twist of expression, she sensed the judge's preconceived notions. He had decided she was a liar, and a liar who dared to walk in late, no less. The prosecutor, Robert Cole, a stout man with a receding hairline, took the floor next. He spoke with the dry confidence of someone who believed he was representing the unshakable side of the law. "Your Honor, Ms. Crockett's record of testimony is riddled with discrepancies. We have sworn affidavits stating she was in 2 different places at once. We have documentation carrying her signature that directly contradicts her sworn statements, and we have reason to believe this is an orchestrated attempt to defame a respected government institution." He paused, letting those words sink in. The public in the gallery shifted slightly, uneasy with the suggestion that Jasmine was some sort of mastermind manipulator. Jasmine kept her eyes forward. She knew the drill. Never show fear, never look away. But her heart was racing. She remembered every step that had led her here, every sleepless night combing through evidence, every official who brushed her off when she tried to do the right thing. She'd never intended to be a whistleblower, nor did she relish the limelight. She had stumbled onto something that made her question the integrity of her department, and when she spoke up, the system quickly turned on her. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. He always told her to stand tall when she was sure of her convictions. She was sure now, even though the swirling accusations made it feel like she was crawling through quicksand. She took another breath. This was just the start. She had to endure these opening barbs, let the prosecution show its hand. Her side of the story would come. She clung to that hope like a lifeline. The judge addressed Harold again, ignoring Jasmine directly. "You say you have evidence. It had better be concrete, Mr. Bryant. I will not tolerate theatrics in this courtroom. We're here for truth. And if the truth reveals that your client lied under oath, I'll have no hesitation applying the full weight of the law." His words resonated in a tone that suggested a final warning, as if he were already sentencing Jasmine in his mind. Then he looked at the clock on the wall, eyebrows drawn. "It's now 5 minutes to noon. We'll reconvene after lunch. Court is in recess." With that, he banged the gavel. The tension shattered into a dozen smaller hushes. Jasmine exhaled, shoulders slumping just an inch as the judge departed the bench. The murmur among the public was subdued, as though they weren't sure they were allowed to speak even now. She bent down and gathered her binder, pressing it to her chest. Within it lay the carefully compiled records that might save her. She and Harold walked quietly out of the courtroom, parting the sea of onlookers who stepped aside like startled witnesses. Outside, more reporters lurked. Cameras flashed, microphones jutted forward. She kept her eyes down, letting Harold guide her through the throng, giving non-committal replies to any pointed questions. She heard phrases like "facing serious jail time" and "accused of lying to the state," tossed around with an almost casual disregard. The crowd fed on the drama, hungry for any sensational detail. In a small conference room down the hallway, Jasmine finally let her fear show on her face. She dropped into a chair, her binder resting on a table scarred with old coffee rings and pen marks. Harold closed the door behind them, shutting out the prying eyes. He spoke in a low voice, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll get our shot," he said, glancing at her. "All we need is the judge to allow this new evidence into the record. The original signature logs, the security footage, the timesheets. Once we lay it all out, the prosecution's case will start to look thin." But she could see the tension in his shoulders. He didn't trust the judge, and neither did she. Ever since Jasmine had voiced her concerns about certain government officials doctoring documents to hide budget inconsistencies, it seemed doors closed faster than she could open them. Even obtaining this binder of evidence had been a monumental task. She'd had to rely on quiet allies in the department, who risked their own careers to pass her the untainted documents. Each page told a story of numbers altered, of funds diverted, of signatures forged. Jasmine had stumbled onto a well-oiled machine of deception. When she refused to participate, they pinned it all on her. They claimed she had been the one forging signatures to conceal her own wrongdoing. The system swallowed that narrative eagerly. Now, in that musty conference room, time seemed to slow. She stared at the binder, recalling the night she first found the crucial document. It was a late shift at the office, months ago. A single discrepancy in an internal file led her down a rabbit hole. The more she dug, the more she found. Her body had been trembling with adrenaline when she realized the scale of the corruption. She never wanted to become the center of a scandal. But sometimes you don't choose the fight chooses you. Her attorney handed her a plastic cup of water and she drank it gratefully. Outside, the corridor grew quieter as people drifted to lunch. She could almost taste the tension swirling in the air, thick with suspicion and dread. In a few short hours, they'd be back in front of that judge, a man who seemed poised to give her the harshest sentence possible, if she so much as blinked incorrectly. Then the door opened, and a woman in a conservative gray suit stepped in. She was one of Jasmine's few supporters, a co-worker named Regina, who believed Jasmine's story from the start. Regina had her own stack of papers and a determined set to her jaw. "We found something else," she said quietly, setting the papers on the table. It's a copy of a memo circulated to upper management about the missing funds, dated 2 weeks before the alleged signature. Regina's voice shook slightly. She knew how dangerous it was to stand against the establishment, but she also knew Jasmine wasn't lying. Jasmine scanned the memo, heart pounding. It referenced unaccounted disbursements and potentially illicit reappropriations of department finances. It was marked as confidential. This was more than just a piece of paper. It was proof that the department heads were aware of inconsistencies before Jasmine supposedly falsified anything. If introduced properly, it could poke a massive hole in the prosecution's case. But would the judge allow it in evidence? That was the question swirling in everyone's mind. If he refused, the rest of their defense might crumble. Harold took the memo and read it in silence, then carefully added it to the binder. The weight of the binder felt symbolic to Jasmine. Every piece of evidence was a small flame in the darkness. She just needed the chance to let it burn bright enough for the court to see. She clasped her hands together, forcing herself to keep calm. "We have to make him see," she whispered, as if uttering a prayer. "We have to make everyone see." Regina placed a reassuring hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "They'll see," she said softly. "They'll have no choice once you lay it all out." Yet the tremor in Regina's words betrayed her own uncertainty. Everyone knew that sometimes in the realm of justice, truth alone wasn't enough. Harold coughed gently, trying to break the emotional tension in the room. He glanced at the clock. They still had a short window before court resumed. "We'll finalize our approach," he said, spreading the documents across the table. "We lead with the timesheets, then show the memo, then the signature analysis from the forensic expert. The key is establishing a pattern of forgery that implicates others, not Jasmine." Jasmine nodded, barely hearing him. Her mind flickered back to the judge's eyes, the way they seemed to bore into her. She recognized in him the face of a system that had long grown complacent, a system that might protect itself at any cost. She feared that no matter how strong her evidence was, the judge could rule it inadmissible or disregard its significance. But she had to try. As they quietly strategized in that cramped room, the specter of injustice loomed larger. She could almost hear the phantom echo of the gavel, a dark omen reminding her that the room she would step into wasn't just a courtroom, it was a battlefield. She picked up a pen and underlined a sentence in the memo, the words practically leaping off the page. The potential discovery of these reappropriations would pose a liability. It was a confession without being a confession. A tacit admission that someone higher up knew exactly what was going on. She glanced at Regina, who gave a tight, supportive smile, one small expression of unity, in a world that felt otherwise barren of hope. If not for these quiet supporters, Jasmine might have already crumbled under the weight of accusations. She had no illusions. Once she stood before the judge again, the prosecution would try to bury every piece of exculpatory evidence. They would question her credibility, her motives, even her memory. They would reduce her to a single label: liar. Time ticked away. Lunch break was drawing to a close, and the corridors of the courthouse began to fill again with voices, footsteps, the sound of jackets rustling. The press would be waiting. The silent observers would find their seats once more, and the drama would resume with renewed intensity. Jasmine wondered if she had enough emotional stamina to withstand the day, but then she reminded herself that this wasn't about her alone. If she backed down, if she let them paint her as a liar, it would signal to everyone else that truth has no place in that courthouse, and she couldn't let that happen. She stood, smoothing her skirt, looking at the binder with a renewed determination. Harold and Regina gathered their belongings. They would face the judge again, present their case, and wait for the blow of the gavel to either shatter them or reveal the cracks in the institution that condemned her. As they left the conference room, Jasmine walked with her head held high, refusing to let the swirl of uncertainty and fear take control. The truth was with her, and for now, that had to be enough. The hallway was alive with tension as they made their way back to the courtroom. A few supporters offered encouraging nods, and Jasmine returned a polite, subdued nod of gratitude. The feeling in her chest was a mixture of dread and steeled resolve. She was about to enter the crucible, and there was no turning back. As the heavy doors swung open and she took her seat again, she saw the judge reappear, his black robes trailing behind him like a cloak of finality. The murmurs died down. replaced by a silence so complete it felt like a collective intake of breath. She set the binder on the table and ran her fingers over its cover. This binder was her shield. She didn't need a sword. She needed the truth to pierce the layers of cynicism in that courtroom. Harold looked at her with a quiet nod. The judge lifted his gavel. The afternoon session began with a stern call for order. And just like that, the next battle commenced. Jasmine's mind flickered through every detail. The memo, the timesheets, the forensic signature analysis. One by one, she would lay them bare. The judge might scoff. The prosecution might sneer. But she had to believe that somewhere in the hearts of everyone present, there still existed an understanding of right and wrong, even if the judge himself had forgotten it. She braced herself. The tension was suffocating, but she wouldn't crumble. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. The prosecutor stepped forward, already rattling off a list of inconsistencies in her prior testimony. Jasmine listened, her jaw clenched as he twisted her words. He painted her as a cunning manipulator, forging documents to conceal her own negligence. He cited statements from supervisors who claimed they'd warned her about misrepresentations. He referred to official records that contradicted her timeline. Every accusation felt like a hail of arrows aimed directly at her credibility. But then, at the precise moment Harold rose to respond, the hush in the courtroom intensified. For the first time, Jasmine saw something akin to a flicker of fear cross the prosecutor's eyes. Harold began methodically presenting the evidence, each piece revealing a new crack in the prosecution's narrative. Jasmine watched the judge, searching for any sign of genuine attention. His face remained impassive, but she refused to let hopelessness seep in. The binder opened, pages turned, and with each revelation, the tension built toward a crescendo. She could feel a silent ripple moving through the spectators. Evidence after evidence, meticulously laid out, began to challenge every slanted fact that had been thrown against her. A slight tremor ran through the prosecutor's voice as he tried to object. "Irrelevant," he said at one point, gesturing angrily to the memo. "This has no direct bearing on Ms. Crockett's alleged perjury." But Harold argued that it established motive for others to forge her signature, to frame her. The judge's eyes narrowed. Would he dismiss it? Or would he finally open a door to the possibility that Jasmine wasn't the villain? The judge leaned forward, studying the memo. Then Harold's face, then Jasmine's. A charged silence followed. Jasmine's pulse roared in her ears. Finally, in a clipped tone, the judge ruled, "I'll allow it into evidence. For now." That was the faintest glimmer of hope, a small victory that ignited a spark in Jasmine's heart. She saw Regina in the gallery, fists clenched in silent triumph, but the struggle was far from over. The prosecution tried to undercut every point raised, using dramatic insinuations to keep the suspicion on Jasmine. They highlighted that the memo didn't mention her by name, that perhaps she was reading into it. They implied that her entire motivation was to discredit her superiors for personal gain. Jasmine felt anger flare in her chest, but she kept her posture controlled. One emotional outburst and they'd say she was unhinged, unstable. Hours crept by, turning the afternoon into a drawn-out duel of words and wills. The judge frequently rubbed his temple, as though the weight of the case was giving him a headache. Jasmine couldn't tell if he was swaying in their favor or digging his heels deeper into his conviction that she was guilty. The gallery remained spellbound, as if they were watching a precarious balance. A single piece of evidence accepted or rejected might tip the scales. At last, the sun's rays shifted through the tall windows, painting the marble floor with a warmer hue. Court was adjourned for the day, and Jasmine left with her heart still pounding. She managed to avoid the press, ducking out a side entrance. Regina and Harold followed close behind. None of them spoke until they were inside Harold's car. Then Harold said quietly, "We made progress today. Not enough to clinch it, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in their case. Now we just have to see if the judge will let those seeds grow, or if he stomps them out." Jasmine gazed out the window, watching the courthouse recede behind them. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Relief that the day was over, dread for tomorrow's inevitable clash, and a flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth would find its way. She clutched the binder on her lap as though it were a lifeline. The documents inside were crucial, yes, but there was another piece of evidence she hadn't yet revealed. Something so powerful it could end this entire charade in an instant. She hadn't told even Harold about it. A part of her feared that if it came to light too soon, forces outside the courtroom would move to suppress it. She closed her eyes and remembered the moment she'd stumbled upon that final piece of proof. It had arrived in the form of a plain manila envelope slipped under her door just 2 nights ago. Inside, she found a tiny flash drive and a single note. "This is what they want to hide." Her heart had nearly exploded as she watched the footage on her laptop. It showed exactly who had forged her signature, exactly who had orchestrated the cover-up. It was a bombshell that could either set her free or put her in greater danger. She decided then to keep it secret until the right moment. Perhaps that moment was approaching faster than she'd anticipated. In the car, Harold asked if she was hungry, but Jasmine shook her head. The anxiety gnawing at her stomach left no room for food. Regina quietly offered a sympathetic smile. As they drove through the city streets, passing the familiar buildings and traffic lights, Jasmine thought about everything she had sacrificed for this fight. Friendships, her sense of security, her peace of mind. But she also thought about the people in that department who continued to suffer under corrupt leadership. She knew that if she failed, the message would be clear. No one stands against power without being crushed. They pulled up to Jasmine's modest apartment complex. She stepped out, still clutching the binder. Harold rolled down the window and spoke softly. "We start again tomorrow morning. Be prepared for the prosecution to go after you even harder. They'll sense the case slipping away if we keep this up." She thanked him and nodded, shutting the car door. Regina waved goodbye from the passenger seat. Jasmine stood there for a moment, watching the car merge back into traffic, feeling the heat of the day radiate off the sidewalk. Then she turned and walked into her building. Inside her apartment, the quiet felt overwhelming. No ticking clock, no chattering voices. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. She kicked off her shoes and sank into the couch. Her eyes went to the binder. Then, almost reluctantly, she reached into her purse and pulled out the small flash drive. She held it in the palm of her hand, staring at it as though it were something alive. This was the trump card. But was it safe to use it now? If the judge was so biased that no amount of legitimate evidence could sway him, would unveiling the flash drive change anything? Or could it vanish under some procedural technicality? She bit her lip, anxiety coiling tight in her chest. Maybe she should give it to a trusted journalist. Let them break the story wide open. But that could undermine her case if it was seen as a breach of confidentiality or some sort of manipulation of the public narrative. She felt trapped between strategies, uncertain which would truly guarantee justice. She stood, walked to her desk, and booted up her laptop. The flash drive clicked into place. She watched the footage again, even though every frame was burned into her mind. It showed a dimly lit office, date-stamped 2 days before her alleged perjury. She recognized the outlines of desks, filing cabinets. A familiar figure entered, rummaged through some drawers. Then another figure joined, flicking on a lamp. The camera angle was narrow, but the face was unmistakable. The same official who had accused her of forging documents. He laid out a piece of paper that resembled the very form Jasmine was accused of signing dishonestly. She watched as he lifted a pen, bent over it, and carefully traced the signature. Her signature. The camera even caught him muttering, "That should bury her." The words were muffled, but audible enough if one listened closely. It was the final straw, the ultimate betrayal. Here was living proof of how far they go to protect their corruption. The tears came then, unbidden, not from sadness alone, but from a mix of outrage and relief. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining a conspiracy. There it was, in stark clarity, a deliberate scheme to frame her. She quickly wiped her eyes. She had to remain strong, to keep a level head. Tomorrow, she would face them again. She would stand in front of the judge who already seemed to have made up his mind. She would stand before the prosecutor who smirked and insinuated her guilt. And she would have to find the perfect moment to detonate this truth, like a silent bomb that would obliterate every lie uttered against her. Late into the night, Jasmine remained at her desk, scribbling notes, planning her approach. If the judge offered any opening, any chance to properly present this footage, she had to be ready. She'd walk the court through every damning second, ensuring the audio was played on the record. The next day could be her redemption, or the day they found another way to block her. She swallowed hard, thinking about how cunning the system could be. Eventually, exhaustion weighed on her. She crawled into bed, the flash drive tucked safely into a hidden pouch in her purse. She drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by dreams of gavels pounding, of that official forging her name over and over until the world believed she was nothing but a liar. She awoke at dawn with her nerves frayed, but her determination sharper than ever. A new day, another chance. Arriving at the courthouse early, she found the corridors relatively empty. She clutched her binder, the flash drive safely nested within it now. She couldn't risk leaving it behind. Harold and Regina arrived soon after, each giving her a subdued but encouraging greeting. The tension among them was palpable, but so was the sense of purpose. None of them voiced the silent fear lurking at the edges of their thoughts. What if the judge refused to see reason? When they entered the courtroom, it felt as though the air had grown heavier overnight. The judge was already on the bench, expression stern, as if scowling at them for daring to continue this fight. The bailiff announced the session, and the hush settled once more. The prosecution wasted no time, launching into a fiery condemnation of the baseless documents presented the previous day. They claimed the memo was misinterpreted, that the signatures were verified and legitimate, that Ms. Crockett was spinning a conspiracy out of thin air. They demanded the judge move to a swift ruling, brand her a liar, and end this charade. Jasmine could practically feel the moral outrage bubbling inside her. She longed to leap up and hold the flash drive high, to force them all to watch the damning footage, but she waited. Harold calmly requested to be heard in full, referencing the binder, the chain of custody for each document, the context that proved everything they'd said was valid. The judge listened with a stony expression. Somewhere in the midst of this legal back and forth, Jasmine felt the energy in the room shift. It was subtle, maybe a restless movement from the gallery, maybe a faint hush that betrayed growing curiosity. The judge's gaze flickered to her for the briefest moment, as if he were finally seeing her as a person rather than a caricature. She didn't smile or cower, she simply stared back, resolute. Then it happened. The prosecutor, in his eagerness to destroy her credibility, mentioned that the alleged forgery couldn't possibly exist on any video evidence, because it was, in his words, a purely fabricated narrative. Jasmine's pulse quickened. She realized this was the opening. Harold shot her a glance. She gave a slight nod. He rose, cleared his throat, and spoke directly to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution has insisted no video evidence exists. We have recently obtained such evidence, and it directly implicates a senior official in forging Ms. Crockett's signature. We request permission to introduce it to the court immediately." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge's brow furrowed. The prosecutor's eyes went wide for a moment, then hardened. He tried to interject, to claim surprise, to demand a recess. But the judge, perhaps intrigued by the possibility of concluding the matter definitively, allowed Harold to proceed. Jasmine's heart pounded as she passed the flash drive to Harold. The bailiff approached, carrying it to a small screen at the front of the courtroom. Everyone, from the silent observers to the press in the back row, seemed to lean forward in collective anticipation. As the video began, Jasmine felt the hush deepen. The grainy security footage flickered into view. The figures appeared. The office setting was recognizable. She could sense every pair of eyes in the room fixated on the screen. The forging official stepped into the frame, rummaging through documents. Then he called the second figure over. The camera captured the act, the pen pressing down, the slow, deliberate mimicry of Jasmine's signature. The audio hissed, but the words were audible. "That should bury her." A gasp escaped someone in the gallery. The footage ended. The screen went dark. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum. The judge stared at the blank screen, his mouth slightly parted. The prosecutor looked as though he'd been punched in the gut. You could almost see the gears turning in his head, trying to find a counter-argument, a claim that this footage was doctored, but the timestamp and the setting matched other verified records. The forging official's face was unmistakable. Harold turned to the judge, voice steady but tinged with a quiet triumph. "Your Honor, as you can see, Ms. Crockett's signature was deliberately forged. The same individuals accusing her of dishonesty orchestrated this sham. We rest our case on the plain truth revealed here." A heavy stillness hung in the room. Jasmine's breathing was shallow, her heart beating so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. She dared to glance at the judge, searching for any sign of what he would do. His face remained an inscrutable mask for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice carried a tremor. "The court will need to authenticate this video," he said, attempting to maintain an even tone. "But if it's genuine, then we have a very serious issue at hand. Counsel for the prosecution, have you any immediate rebuttal?" The prosecutor stood, sputtering. His words came out tangled, feeble. We question the chain of custody of this evidence. There could be a possibility of editing or—" But he trailed off, realizing how unconvincing he sounded in the face of something so undeniably damning. The judge's expression hardened. He didn't seem inclined to indulge half-baked objections. Jasmine felt tears sting her eyes. She gripped the edge of the table, finally allowing herself a tiny breath of relief. The hush in the gallery broke as whispers buzzed among the onlookers. Reporters were scribbling furiously, adrenaline surging as they realized they had a major story on their hands. One of the silent observers, an older woman with kind eyes, gave Jasmine a nod that spoke volumes. "You did it." Everything after that moment felt like it blurred together, as though the room was spinning on a tilted axis. The judge ordered a recess for an independent tech analysis of the video. The bailiff escorted the flash drive to a secure location. The prosecutor insisted on sending it to their own experts. But the tide had shifted. Everyone could sense it. The evidence was too explicit, too raw to be easily dismissed. And with that reality, the fortress of accusation around Jasmine began to crack. When the court reconvened later, the judge's tone had changed. He no longer looked at Jasmine with obvious hostility. Instead, his eyes darted nervously between the binder of documents, the notes from the tech analysts, and the humiliated posture of the prosecutor. The final blow came when an independent forensic examiner testified that, based on initial analysis, the video hadn't been tampered with. The judge's face grew pale. For the first time, he addressed Jasmine directly, his voice quiet. "Ms. Crockett, it appears that there has been a grave injustice here. The court will be taking steps to examine all evidence thoroughly. But for the moment, these charges against you, they seem wholly unsubstantiated." His words almost made Jasmine collapse from sheer relief. She stayed upright, gripping the table with damp palms. The gallery erupted into a low murmur, an undercurrent of disbelief and triumph. The prosecutor tried to salvage his case, babbling about further investigations. But the judge cut him off. "We will reconvene once the authenticity of the footage is fully verified. Until then, Ms. Crockett is free to go about her life without the burden of these accusations. This court stands adjourned," and he brought the gavel down with a heavy, resonant thud. Jasmine closed her eyes. It felt like a door that had been slammed in her face for so long had finally creaked open. She felt Regina's hand on her shoulder, a congratulatory squeeze. Harold let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. The public in the gallery watched with wide-eyed wonder, and as Jasmine turned, she saw a flash of cameras from the hallway capturing the moment. The tension drained from her muscles, replaced by something else, a sense of victory, and an even deeper determination to expose the corruption that had nearly destroyed her. Stepping out of the courtroom, Jasmine had to face the onslaught of reporters. Microphones were thrust toward her. Questions shouted from every angle. "Ms. Crockett, did you know this evidence existed all along? How do you feel now that the video contradicts the official account? Do you plan to press charges?" She couldn't answer everything at once, and Harold guided her gently through the throng, issuing a brief statement. "We believe justice will be served as this evidence undergoes further review. Ms. Crockett is relieved to be vindicated, and we thank the court for acknowledging the truth." Then they escaped into the corridor, cameras trailing behind them in a wave of chaotic motion. Eventually, they reached a quiet alcove near the exit doors. Regina gave Jasmine a spontaneous hug, tears shining in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "They tried to break you, but you stood your ground." Jasmine hugged her back, feeling a swirl of gratitude and shock. "We did it," she corrected, remembering the countless ways Regina had helped, not to mention Harold's unwavering legal support. Harold checked his phone, receiving updates from colleagues. "It looks like the judge wants a follow-up hearing in a few days to formally dismiss the charges," he said. "But I'd say we've reached the turning point. They can't ignore that footage, not with how clear it is." Jasmine felt a knot of tension unravel in her chest. But along with the relief came a surge of righteous anger. She'd almost lost everything, her reputation, her freedom, because someone in authority believed they could smear her into silence. She saw the older couple from the gallery passing by, giving her a quick thumbs up. A few strangers paused to offer words of support. The press wasn't far behind, but Harold shielded her from further questions as best he could. She realized that in a way her life would never be the same. The moment the truth aired in court, her name and story would spread. She was now the face of a fight against institutional decay. It was frightening, but also empowering. They stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. It felt warmer, somehow less oppressive than it had that morning. The sky had taken on a golden hue, and Jasmine breathed in the fresh air, letting it wash over her. Regina said quietly, "I hope that official gets what he deserves. He nearly ruined you, just to keep his secrets buried." Jasmine nodded, thinking about the face of the man forging her name. She thought about the entrenched corruption behind him. He was hardly the only guilty party. There would be investigations, possibly criminal charges for those who conspired against her. This was only the start of a much larger struggle, but for now at least, the looming threat over her had been shattered. The truth, once unleashed, was not so easily caged. She made her way down the courthouse steps, flanked by Regina and Harold. Cameras flashed. Reporters peppered them with final questions. Jasmine gave a brief statement. "I'm grateful that evidence was allowed to speak for itself. I hope this serves as a reminder that truth is worth fighting for, no matter the odds." Her voice trembled slightly, but it carried the resonance of hard-won conviction. She didn't need to shout. The gravity of the evidence had done the talking. They parted ways at the bottom of the steps, each heading to their respective vehicles. Jasmine lingered for a moment, looking back at the imposing courthouse doors. She thought about how close she'd come to being swallowed by its machinery, how a single piece of footage saved her from a nightmare. But she also remembered that her fight had started long before this trial, back when she discovered those financial discrepancies. She had a choice. Walk away now and let the system handle the rest, or keep pushing until every thread of corruption was unraveled. She felt a stir of courage in her heart. She wouldn't walk away. Someone had to hold the powerful accountable. If she backed down, there would be another Jasmine Crockett in the future. Another whistleblower crushed by conspiracies and false accusations. The thought steeled her resolve. She resolved to stand not just for herself, but for anyone who found themselves cornered by authorities who thought they could manipulate justice. In the days that followed, news of the forged signature scandal spread like wildfire. Headlines read, "Evidence vindicates Jasmine Crockett," and "Video exposes high-level corruption in government office." Talk shows debated the implications. Activists applauded her courage, and cynics wondered if it would all be swept under the rug once public attention shifted. But Jasmine stayed visible, granting cautious interviews where she reiterated the importance of safeguarding accountability. She had no desire to become a celebrity. She wanted change. Each day, as new inquiries were launched into the department's finances, she saw the walls closing in on those who framed her. The forging official was placed on immediate leave pending investigation. Others were named as potential co-conspirators. It was the beginning of a purge that might finally restore integrity where it had been lost. The follow-up court date arrived, less dramatic than the first. The judge formally dismissed the perjury charges against Jasmine. He read the order in a subdued tone, as though unwilling to fully admit how wrong he had been. Yet there was no denying it. Her name was cleared. Reporters pounced on the story once again, capturing her exiting the courthouse with a sense of liberation in her step. She didn't gloat or cheer. She simply offered a brief statement. "I'm relieved and grateful for this outcome, and I trust the investigation will bring full accountability to those responsible." Then she walked away, ignoring the barrage of further questions. In the privacy of her apartment that night, she finally allowed herself a moment to break down. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she no longer had the cloud of criminal charges hanging over her. She was free, not unscarred, but free. She thought about her father's wisdom, how he taught her to stand her ground when she believed in something righteous. She thought about Regina's unwavering support, Harold's steadfast defense, and the silent observers who listened and watched, quietly rooting for her when everything looked bleak. Yet there was still more to do. The next day, she set up a meeting with a small group of concerned citizens. Some colleagues who had witnessed the rot in the department but never dared speak up. Encouraged by Jasmine's exoneration, they formed a coalition to demand greater transparency. They wrote letters, gathered evidence, and pushed for formal investigations into the deeper layers of corruption. More whistleblowers emerged, emboldened by Jasmine's victory, each sharing their own stories of intimidation and cover-ups. As the momentum grew, Jasmine found herself balancing relief with responsibility. She became an inadvertent leader in a movement she never planned to lead. Despite her natural inclination for quiet work, she accepted interviews and wrote op-eds. She understood that if she stepped back into the shadows, the system might revert to its old ways. The day a major news outlet aired a feature on her case, focusing on the hidden camera footage, she felt a surge of both pride and concern. Publicity was a double-edged sword, but if it protected her and others from retaliation, it was a necessary burden. Meanwhile, the prosecutor who once smirked in court now found himself under scrutiny for zealously pursuing charges against her without examining all the facts. The judge, too, faced criticism for his evident bias and for nearly condemning an innocent woman. Jasmine took no joy in their humiliation, but she hoped it served as a warning. Justice is not a game to be played with personal prejudices. In every interview, she emphasized that the real enemy was the complacency of institutions that protect their own at the expense of truth. Harold teased her that she had become a public figure for justice, half lawyer, half crusader. She only shook her head and laughed softly. "I just want an honest system," she would say. "I'm not trying to be a hero." But the public latched onto her story, seeing in her a symbol of resistance against official wrongdoing. Letters poured in, some from people facing similar battles, seeking her advice or just wanting to share their own experiences. She tried to respond to as many as she could, moved by how widespread the struggle for truth really was. Through it all, Jasmine remained mindful of the cost. She'd been fortunate to have proof, to have allies who risked their livelihoods to stand by her. But not everyone was as fortunate. Some were blacklisted, cornered by legal traps, or silenced by fear. She vowed to use her newfound voice to amplify theirs, to remind the world that for every whistleblower who triumphs, countless others are crushed before they can even speak. Weeks turned into months, investigations deepened, and multiple officials were implicated. Indictments loomed. The department underwent a sweeping overhaul. The forging official was charged with multiple counts, including conspiracy to commit fraud. As his mugshot circulated, Jasmine felt a pang of sadness. She never set out to destroy anyone's life. She simply wanted to reveal the truth. But sometimes truth comes with consequences. She hoped that in the long run, the justice system would rebuild itself stronger, more honest. When the day came for the forging official's trial, Jasmine debated whether to attend. It wasn't her case to fight anymore. The state had taken over, armed with the same evidence that once saved her. Ultimately, she decided to go, not out of vengeance, but out of a desire to see justice through. She sat quietly in the back, away from the glare of the press. She listened as the prosecution laid out the official's misdeeds, how he forged documents to frame an innocent woman, how he siphoned funds for personal gain, how he threatened subordinates who questioned him. In a moment of moral irony, the judge presiding over that trial was different. Someone with a reputation for fairness and impartiality. The forging official's defense was weak. The footage was undeniable. By the time the verdict came down, guilty, Jasmine felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. She slipped out of the courtroom before reporters could swarm her. Outside, the sky was clear and blue, and she breathed in the fresh air, relieved that the circle of deceit was finally broken. But her story didn't end there. Having been to the edge of the abyss, she knew how fragile justice could be. She continued her advocacy, meeting with grassroots organizations, sharing her experiences, and assisting others in gathering evidence. She leveraged her platform to push for reforms, such as better protections for whistleblowers and stricter oversight measures. Some politicians reached out to her, wanting her endorsement or her story to boost their credibility. She was wary of them, understanding that not all offers of support were genuine. Still, she navigated the political waters carefully, focusing on what mattered, ensuring no one else would face wrongful prosecution for telling the truth. Despite the intensity of the months that followed, she also found small pockets of peace. She reconnected with friends, took time to heal from the emotional toll, and even took a brief vacation with Regina, who had become not just a supportive colleague but a dear friend. They lounged on a quiet beach, letting the rhythmic waves wash away the lingering stress. At night, under a sky full of stars, Regina asked her if she'd ever regretted coming forward. Jasmine answered honestly, "In the darkest moments, yes. I questioned everything. But looking back, I regret nothing. Some battles are worth fighting, even if they tear you apart." When she returned from that trip, she learned that the prosecutor who once hounded her had resigned, citing personal reasons. Rumors swirled that the resignation was connected to an internal review of how he handled her case. Jasmine felt a complex mixture of vindication and empathy. She hoped that this chain reaction would deter others from casually accusing the innocent in the future. She remained a quiet warrior, not seeking fame or fortune, but using her ordeal to highlight the vulnerability of individuals who stand against powerful institutions. Sometimes reporters called her the untamed witness, a nickname she found overblown but somewhat flattering. The nickname stuck, especially after a long-form article chronicled her journey from an unnoticed department worker to a symbol of justice. That article ended with the line, "Jasmine Crockett refused to be silenced," and in doing so, she forced an entire institution to speak the truth. Even as her story became a footnote in the ever-churning news cycle, its ripple effect endured. In the state legislature, bills were introduced to strengthen whistleblower protections and impose harsher penalties for forging official documents. Agencies launched internal reviews to ensure oversight. Public interest in accountability peaked, at least temporarily, and Jasmine took solace in knowing her struggle was part of that shift in consciousness. Occasionally, she'd be startled in the grocery store by someone recognizing her from the news. They'd say things like, "Thank you for what you did," or "You gave me courage." Those moments reminded her that she hadn't just cleared her own name, she'd opened a door for others to challenge injustice. She would smile politely and respond with humility. Inside, she felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. The quiet woman she once was, hoping to pass through life without too many ripples, had evolved into someone who believed wholeheartedly in the moral imperative to speak up. Late one evening, months after the final trial concluded, Jasmine sat by her living room window. The lights of the city glimmered below, and she sipped a cup of tea, reflecting on how her life had changed. She'd considered leaving town, starting fresh somewhere else, but she decided against it. This city, with its flaws and triumphs, had become part of her story. Its courthouse, once a symbol of everything stacked against her, now stood as a reminder of her resilience. A place where she nearly lost everything, but instead found her voice. Regina called that night. Excited. "They just aired a piece on the official's sentencing," she said. "He's getting at least 6 years. Maybe more, if they find additional misdeeds." "Can you believe it?" Jasmine listened quietly, absorbing the news. She didn't celebrate the downfall of another human being, but she felt relief that the system had not totally failed this time. She thought about all the others who conspired, who signed off on false documents or turned a blind eye. She hoped they too would face accountability. After hanging up, Jasmine looked around her apartment. The once cluttered piles of documents were gone, replaced by a tidier sense of order. She still had her binder, though, its edges scuffed, pages neatly arranged. She'd kept it as a reminder of where she'd been, of the power of evidence and the importance of documentation. Next to it, in a secure lockbox, was the flash drive. She thought about how close she'd come to never seeing that footage. If the anonymous sender hadn't slipped it under her door, her life might have taken a very different turn. She stood, crossed the room, and took the flash drive from the lockbox. Holding it in the palm of her hand, she recalled the wave of relief and astonishment she felt the first time she viewed it. This tiny piece of technology had toppled a fortress of deception. She placed it back gently, locking it away. Some truths needed to be safeguarded even after the battle was won. In the months that followed, Jasmine embraced a new chapter of her life, one not entirely consumed by court hearings and daily reports of scandal. She'd found a renewed sense of purpose, one that still involved advocacy, but allowed her moments of quiet joy. She laughed more freely with Regina, occasionally grabbed coffee with Harold, and visited community groups where she spoke about the lessons she had learned. to document everything, to find allies, to believe that truth had a fighting chance, even in the darkest corners of bureaucracy. When the press would ask her for a final comment, something to sum up her remarkable journey from the accused to the vindicated, she always circled back to a simple conviction: truth matters. It may be silenced for a time, people may conspire against it, but in the end, when it sees the light, it can bring down walls you never thought possible. And that was how she lived now, guided by the knowledge that truth was the bedrock of any just society. Jasmine never forgot the sound of that gavel coming down before she had a chance to speak on the first day. It lingered in her memory as a symbol of how easily one can be condemned by appearances, by preconceived notions, by a system uninterested in nuance. But she also remembered the moment the gavel came down after the video was shown, the hush that fell over the courtroom as the truth commanded its own kind of authority. It was a reminder that every gavel strike has two sides. One can silence the innocent, or it can seal the fate of the guilty. The difference lies in whether the system is willing to see what's right in front of it. Late at night, sometimes, she'd replay everything in her mind. The judge's sneer, the prosecutor's smirk, the quiet allies who risked so much, the audience in the gallery who watched, hearts pounding, as she fought for her freedom. She would recall the older woman in the front row who gave her that small nod of solidarity, or the covert glances from the press who came in expecting a typical open and shut perjury case, only to discover a hidden conspiracy unraveling before their eyes. It was a testament to how quickly fortunes can shift when evidence is strong and willpower is unbroken. Though no headlines were as dramatic as the day her evidence silenced the courtroom, Jasmine's life continued on a steady, purposeful path. She'd stay in touch with people who needed her guidance, and she'd watch carefully as the justice system recalibrated, piece by piece, in response to the scandal. She never forgot that institutions, like people, have the capacity for both corruption and redemption. For every official who exploited their power, there was another who believed in service and honesty. Whenever she felt doubt or weariness creeping in, she'd take a moment to reflect on the turning point, the image of the forging official on screen, pen in hand, forging her signature. That moment had a near-sacred quality, an incontrovertible truth that no spin or legal maneuver could twist. It was proof that no matter how well someone manipulates documents, or how convincingly they tell a lie, reality still has a way of revealing itself. And so Jasmine Crockett, once accused of lying in court, stepped forward into her new role, a reluctant but undeniable champion of truth. The world watched for a while, then inevitably shifted its gaze to the next scandal, the next crisis. She accepted that. What mattered was that her life was hers again, untainted by the shadow of false accusations. She walked with a clearer conscience, having faced the darkest corners of power and emerged with her integrity intact. In the quiet hours when the city lights glowed outside her window, she would let her mind roam over the past. There was anger, there was sorrow, there was even a trace of fear left in her. But above all, there was a sense of triumph in knowing that she had stood her ground against overwhelming odds. She remembered hearing the phrase, "If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything." And though it sounded simplistic, it resonated. She never had to contort facts or bury secrets. All she did was present what was real. In the end, that reality was enough to silence every accusation. The day the judge officially cleared her name with a final signed order, she sent copies to her father, to Regina, and kept one for herself. She tucked it away in a safe place, not out of fear, but as a symbol of closure. The trial transcripts, the binder of evidence, and the flash drive. These were the artifacts of a battle well fought. People often asked if she'd burn them to forget the pain. She always shook her head. No, she'd say softly, "We need to remember what happened, so we don't let it happen again." Over time, talk of her case receded from headlines to footnotes, overshadowed by new stories. But every so often someone would stumble upon it, read about the woman who stood up in court, accused of lying, only to unveil a far bigger lie that threatened to destroy her. They'd find footage of her delivering calm, measured statements in front of the media, or pictures of her leaving the courthouse with the faintest victorious smile. In those images, you could see resilience personified. And perhaps that was the truest legacy of Jasmine Crockett's ordeal, a reminder that sometimes one voice, armed with a single piece of indisputable truth, can echo so loudly that an entire courtroom, indeed, an entire institution, must fall silent and listen.